The wind, a relentless and unforgiving force, whipped across the vast open plains of Montana. It carried with it the scent of dry earth, pine, and the promise of an unyielding winter. Ethan Hayes, his face weathered by sun and hardship, watched a dust devil dance across his land. His ranch, the Wild Rose, was a testament to his solitude. It was a place of work, of toil, and of silent memories. At 32, he was a man defined by what he had lost, his parents to a smallpox epidemic, his sister to a fever, and his fiancée to a tragic accident on their way to the altar. He was an island, surrounded by a sea of loneliness, and he had long ago made peace with the idea that he would remain one. His decision to send for a mail-order bride wasn't born of desire, but of practicality. His ranch needed a woman's touch, and he needed an heir to his land. The description from the agency was blunt, almost brutal. Ilara Vance, an orphan from Boston, plain, gaunt, and not one to turn heads. Ethan had read the words, and a part of him felt a grim satisfaction. A plain woman wouldn't stir the ghost of his lost love. She would be a partner, not a passion, a necessity, not a luxury. He had sent the money, signed the papers, and now he simply waited. He stood by the corral, his hands calloused from years of gripping reins and tools. The silence of the ranch was broken only by the snorting of horses and the creaking of the windmill. His foreman, Jedediah Jed Miller, a man with a beard as white as snow and a heart as good as gold, approached him. "Telegram came in, Ethan. She's due on the stage from Boston in 2 days." Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Is the house ready?" "As ready as it can be. Martha helped me air out the rooms. It's clean." Jed's voice was a low rumble. He had known Ethan since he was a boy, and he understood the silent grief that held him captive. "You know, son, you don't have to go through with this. You could call it off." "No," Ethan said, his voice firm. "It's done." Jed sighed. He knew better than to argue. Ethan was a man of his word, and his mind, once made up, was a fortress. The old foreman's eyes scanned the vast ranch. It was a good piece of land, hard won and well kept, but it was missing something. It was missing life. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and red, Ethan returned to his empty house. He looked at the stark furniture, the dusty photographs on the mantelpiece, and the silent corners that held too many memories. He imagined a plain, unassuming woman moving through these rooms, and a strange sense of resignation settled over him. She wouldn't be a replacement for the past, but a different kind of beginning. One built not on love, but on a shared purpose. Little did he know, the woman arriving on the stagecoach was about to shatter his carefully constructed world. 2 days later, the stagecoach rattled into the dusty main street of Havenwood. The town was a collection of wooden buildings with false fronts, a single saloon with a swinging door, and a general store that smelled of coffee and leather. The air was thick with the dust kicked up by the horses and the low hum of daily life. Ethan stood on the boardwalk, his hands tucked into his pockets, his posture stiff with anticipation. The stagecoach door swung open, and a woman stepped out. She was small, and a wide-brimmed hat shaded her face. She wore a simple, dark dress that seemed out of place in the rugged landscape. Ethan's first thought was that the description had been right. She was plain, and she seemed to shrink into herself, as if trying to disappear. His expectations, low as they were met. "Mr. Hayes?" a quiet voice asked. Ethan's gaze finally lifted to her face, and in that moment, the world around him seemed to slow down. The sun, as it broke through a cloud, illuminated her features. Her eyes, a startling shade of blue, were wide and intelligent. Her skin, pale and flawless, was framed by a cascade of auburn hair that spilled from beneath her hat. Her lips were full and curved in a slight, uncertain smile. She was not plain. She was stunning. He stood there, A man accustomed to controlling every aspect of his life, completely speechless. His mind, which had spent weeks preparing for a simple, convenient arrangement, was now a whirlwind of confusion. The telegram had been wrong. The agency's description had been a lie. Ilara Vance looked at the tall, imposing man before her. His face was a roadmap of a hard life, with lines etched around his eyes and a jaw set in a permanent expression of stoicism. He looked at her not with warmth, but with a shock that was almost tangible. She had expected this. She had seen that look before, a look that said, "You are not what I expected. You are not what I was told you were." But she was a survivor. She had faced worse than a man's surprise. "I am Ilara Vance," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Are you Mr. Ethan Hayes?" Ethan found his voice, a low, gruff sound. "I am." He took her bags, his movements clumsy, and led her to his wagon. The short walk to the wagon was filled with an awkward silence. Ilara's mind raced. The man was handsome in a rugged, almost dangerous way, but his expression was one of profound disappointment. She wondered what she had done to deserve such a reaction. She had been honest in her letters. She had told him of her past, of her life as an orphan, of her simple nature. As they rode out of town, the vast landscape unfolded before them. The rolling hills, the towering mountains in the distance, the endless sky. It was a place of breathtaking beauty, but also of raw, untamed power. Ilara felt a strange sense of peace. This was a new beginning, a new canvas on which to paint her life. The Wild Rose Ranch was a sprawling piece of land, well-maintained and prosperous, but the house itself felt cold and empty. It was a house, not a home. Ilara walked through the rooms, her fingers tracing the dusty surfaces. Ethan watched her from the doorway, his silence a heavy presence. "It's a beautiful place, Mr. Hayes," she said, finally breaking the silence. "Ethan," he corrected her, "we're married now, aren't we?" The words, a reminder of their unconventional union, hung in the air between them. Ilara nodded, a blush creeping up her neck. "I understand if you were expecting someone else," she began, her voice low. "The agency's description was misleading." Ethan shook his head. "It doesn't matter." But his mind was still replaying the moment he first saw her. "We have a ranch to run. You can help with the house. I'll take care of the rest." His words, while not unkind, were distant. They were two strangers, sharing a roof, a name, and a future they hadn't chosen. Ilara, however, was not one to be intimidated. She had a spine of steel hidden beneath her delicate exterior. She began to clean, to organize, to breathe life into the sterile rooms. She cooked meals that were simple but nourishing, and her presence began to fill the quiet spaces. Ethan noticed the small changes, the smell of fresh-baked bread, the sound of her humming a tune, the way she had arranged a small bouquet of wildflowers on the kitchen table. He saw her competence. She was a quick learner, and her hands, which had once been used for sewing and mending, now deftly handled ranch chores. She didn't complain about the work or the harsh conditions. She simply did what needed to be done. One afternoon, as she was mending a tear in his favorite shirt, she noticed a faint, jagged scar on his forearm. "What happened?" she asked gently. Ethan's hand instinctively moved to cover it. "An accident. A long time ago." His voice was terse, a clear signal to drop the subject, but Ilara was not so easily deterred. "It looks like a burn, from a fire." Ethan's eyes, usually guarded, flickered with a raw emotion. "My family's house. It burned down. I was the only one to get out." He said the words quickly, as if ripping off a bandage. Ilara's heart ached for him. She saw the pain in his eyes, the deep, unhealed wounds. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw not a convenient partner, but a woman with empathy and compassion. The mask of his solitude began to crack. He saw a kindred spirit, someone who understood loss, even if he didn't know the full extent of her own story. Their fragile peace was shattered with the arrival of Caleb Thorne. Thorne was a man who looked at the world as his personal kingdom and had a reputation for getting what he wanted by any means necessary. He was a cattle magnate who had amassed a fortune through ruthless deals and intimidation. His ambition knew no bounds, and his eyes were now set on the fertile lands of the Wild Rose. He rode up to the ranch one afternoon, a swaggering figure on a well-bred horse, flanked by a half-dozen of his men. Ethan met him at the gate, his hand resting on the hilt of his revolver. "Hayes," Thorne said, his voice a smooth purr that held a dangerous undertone. "I hear you've been doing well for yourself." "Thorne," Ethan replied, his voice flat, "get off my land." Thorne laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "I'm here to make you an offer. Your land. I'll pay you a fair price. It's a prime location for my new herd. We could be partners." "I'm not selling," Ethan said, his voice a low growl. "Everyone has a price, Hayes," Thorne said, his smile never reaching his cold eyes. "And if you don't have one, I'll find a way to make you take one." He gestured with his hand, a chilling motion that encompassed the entire ranch. A man's property can be fragile. Ethan stood his ground, his face a mask of stone. But as Thorne rode away, Ethan felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He knew Thorne's reputation. He was a man who didn't take no for an answer. He would burn down a man's home, rustle his cattle, or worse, just to get his way. That night, Ethan sat in the living room, staring into the fireplace. Ilara, sensing his distress, sat beside him. "What was that about?" she asked. "Caleb Thorne wants our land," Ethan said, his voice heavy with a burden she was just beginning to understand. "He's not a man to be trifled with." Ilara placed her hand on his. Her touch was warm and comforting. "We will face him together," she said. Ethan looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. This woman, who had arrived as a stranger, was now standing by his side, ready to fight a battle that was not her own. The realization was both humbling and terrifying. He had spent so long building a wall around his heart, and she was, with her quiet strength and unwavering loyalty, tearing it down, brick by brick. The first act of sabotage came a week later. A fence, newly repaired and fortified, was found cut to ribbons. A small herd of Ethan's prize-winning cattle had escaped, and it took him and Jed 2 days to round them all up. Then, the water trough for the horses was poisoned. Jed caught the culprit, a young hand who worked for Thorne, and brought him to Ethan. The boy, pale and shaking, confessed to the crime. Ethan, instead of beating him, simply sent him away with a warning. "Tell your boss," he said, his voice hard as stone, "that if he tries to hurt my animals again, I won't be so forgiving." Ilara, with a quiet determination, began to take on more responsibilities. She learned to ride, to shoot, to mend fences with a skill that surprised everyone. She watched the ranch hands, listened to their stories, and soon she was not just the boss's wife, but a respected figure on the ranch. Her quiet wisdom and her ability to calm a restless horse or a frightened child earned her the respect of the entire community. Her courage, however, was truly put to the test when she stumbled upon one of Thorne's men trying to set fire to their barn. Ilara didn't hesitate. She grabbed a bucket of water and threw it on the man, distracting him long enough for Ethan to arrive. They fought off the man together, a shared struggle that forged a new, unspoken bond between them. The small town of Havenwood, meanwhile, was torn. Some people, afraid of Thorne, kept their distance, but others, inspired by Ethan and Ilara's defiance, began to show their support. Women brought food to the ranch, men offered to help with repairs, and the local blacksmith, an old friend of Ethan's father, refused to work for Thorne. The tide was turning. Thorne's brutality was a well-known secret, but now, faced with Ethan and Ilara's courage, people were beginning to find their own. The stress of the constant attacks was taking its toll. Ethan was restless, his nights filled with patrols and his days with planning. Ilara, on the other hand, was an anchor. She kept the house in order, the meals on the table, and her quiet strength was a balm to his weary soul. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the stars come out, Ethan finally spoke. "I was wrong about you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Ilara's heart fluttered. "What do you mean?" "The agency said you were plain. I expected a plain woman, a partner in name only." He turned to face her, his gaze intense. "But you're not. You're extraordinary. You're everything I didn't know I needed." Ilara's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She had waited so long to hear those words, to feel that she was not just a convenience, but a person with value. "You're not what I expected either, Ethan. I expected a man filled with a lonely rage, but you're a good man. You're a kind man. You're just broken." He flinched at the word, but he didn't deny it. "I am." "Then let's fix it together," she said, her voice filled with a conviction that was impossible to ignore. "I'm not leaving. We will save this ranch, and we will save ourselves." Their conversation was a turning point. The awkward distance between them dissolved, replaced by a deep and abiding respect. They began to talk, to share their stories. Ilara told him about her life in Boston, the orphanage, the kindness of a woman who taught her to read and write. He told her about his family, the day of the fire, the day he lost everything. They were two shattered souls, piecing each other back together, finding solace and strength in their shared vulnerability. Thorn, enraged by their resistance and the growing support for the Hayes family, decided to escalate his attacks. He sent his men to burn down the town's general store, hoping to starve the community into submission. But the townspeople, led by Jed and the blacksmith, put out the fire before it could do too much damage. Thorn, now a man blinded by fury, decided to strike at the heart of their strength. He sent a message to Ethan. "Meet me at the old canyon, alone, or your ranch and your pretty little wife will pay the price." Ethan didn't hesitate. He knew this was it, the final showdown. He grabbed his gun and prepared to leave. "You're not going alone," Ilara said, her face pale but determined. "I have to," Ethan said. "This is my fight. I won't put you in danger." "It's our fight, Ethan," she insisted. "Don't you see? We're in this together. If you go alone, you'll be walking into a trap." Her logic was irrefutable. Ethan, against his better judgment, agreed. They rode out together, two figures against the vast, unforgiving landscape, their hearts pounding in their chests. They met Thorn and his men at the canyon. The sun beat down on them, casting long, menacing shadows. Thorn smiled, a cruel and triumphant expression. "Hayes," he said, "you're a fool. You should have taken my offer." "You're a coward, Thorn." Ilara's voice rang out, strong and clear. "You hide behind your men and your money. You have no honor." Thorn's eyes narrowed. "Shut up, woman. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me very much," Ilara retorted. "This is our home, our life, and you will not take it from us." The standoff was tense, the air thick with unspoken threats. Ethan, his hand on his gun, looked at Thorn's men, trying to gauge their intentions. The gunfight erupted in a chaotic burst of sound and smoke. Ethan and Ilara, working as a team, fought with a desperate ferocity. Ethan used his years of experience, his shots precise and deadly. Ilara, surprisingly agile, reloaded his guns, and with a small pistol she had hidden in her dress, she managed to take down one of Thorn's men. Thorn, seeing the tide turning, cursed and ordered his men to retreat. But as he turned to run, Ethan's bullet caught him in the shoulder. He stumbled, falling to the ground, his face contorted in a mix of pain and rage. The fight was over. The canyon was silent once more, save for the moans of the injured and the sound of Ethan and Ilara's heavy breathing. They stood over Thorn, their bodies aching, their hands shaking. "You lost, Thorn," Ethan said, his voice hoarse. "This isn't over, Hayes," Thorn spat, his eyes filled with a venomous hatred. "I'll be back." But he wasn't. The town, tired of his tyranny, had organized a posse. led by Jed. They had followed Ethan and Ilara, a silent army of support, and they now stood on the ridge, their rifles aimed at Thorn's remaining men. Thorn, seeing his defeat was complete, was taken away in chains. The journey back to the ranch was quiet, filled with a sense of relief and exhaustion. They had won. They had saved their home. They had saved their future. The aftermath of the fight was a period of healing. The town, now united, came together to help Ethan and Ilara rebuild what had been destroyed. The general store was repaired, and the community flourished under a new spirit of cooperation. At the ranch, the silence was no longer a sign of loneliness, but of peace. Ethan and Ilara, now more than just partners, were two people in love. Their love, born from a bizarre arrangement and forged in the fire of conflict, was genuine and deep. One evening, as they sat on the porch, a gentle rain began to fall. The smell of wet earth and fresh grass filled the air. Ethan took Ilara's hand in his calloused fingers wrapping around her soft ones. "Ilara," he said, his voice filled with a tenderness she had never heard before, "I have something for you." He pulled out a small, velvet box. Inside was a simple but beautiful silver locket. He opened it, revealing two small, faded photographs, one of his parents and one of his lost fiancée. "I want you to have this," he said. "The past is a part of me, but you are my future. You are my light in the darkness." Ilara's eyes filled with tears. She took the locket and fastened it around her neck. "Ethan," she whispered, "you are no longer a man alone. You are my home." He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in years he felt a profound sense of peace. He had found his home, not in a place, but in a person. A year had passed, and the rugged Montana landscape seemed to have softened around the edges, much like the man who now called it home. The Wild Rose Ranch was no longer just a place of toil. It was a testament to life and growth. The fields, once scarred by neglect and conflict, now burst with the vibrant green of new crops. Fences stood tall and strong, and the barns, rebuilt with the help of the entire community, held the promise of a bountiful future. Within the heart of the ranch, a different kind of growth was unfolding. Ilara was now 6 months pregnant, and the very air seemed to hum with the anticipation of a new life. Her presence had not only healed the ranch, but had transformed it into a true home. The quiet rooms that once echoed with Ethan's loneliness were now filled with the warmth of her laughter, the scent of baking bread, and the soft rhythmic sound of her sewing machine. She was no longer a stranger from Boston, but a cornerstone of this new world. The town of Havenwood, too, had undergone a quiet revolution. Inspired by Ilara's unwavering courage and compassion, the women of the community had formed a council. They met weekly in the refurbished general store, organizing food drives for the less fortunate, setting up a small school for the children, and creating a network of support that had been sorely missing. The children, once wary and timid, now played freely in the dusty streets, their shouts and laughter a joyful symphony that had replaced the somber silence of fear. One sunny afternoon, a soft golden light bathed the ranch. Ethan stood by the corral, his hands resting on the weathered wood, his gaze fixed on the fields. He watched his wife, a picture of serene grace, as she walked slowly through the tall grass, a large, floppy-eared dog trotting faithfully beside her. Her auburn hair, now tied back with a ribbon, seemed to capture the sunlight, creating a halo around her. She was more beautiful than he had ever imagined a woman could be, not with the superficial beauty of a passing glance, but with the profound, soul-deep beauty born of resilience and a loving heart. He remembered that first day, the telegram's cruel description a ghost in his mind. He had prepared for a plain, unassuming woman, a pragmatic solution to a lonely life. He had been so wrong. What he had expected was a convenient arrangement, and what he had found was a love that was a rescue in itself. Ilara had not just saved his ranch, She had saved him. She had shown him that he was worthy of love, of happiness, and of a future that was no longer defined by the ghosts of his past. He pushed away from the fence and walked toward her. The tall grass brushed against his boots as he approached, a silent tribute to the prosperity she had brought to his land. He came up behind her, his hand gently resting on the small of her back, feeling the gentle curve of her pregnancy. The silence between them was not one of distance, but of profound understanding. "Are you happy, Alara?" he asked, his voice a low, husky sound filled with a love that was now, finally, free from the constraints of his past. She turned to face him, her eyes sparkling with a joy that seemed to mirror the sunlight. "More than I ever thought possible, Ethan." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "You gave me a new beginning, a home, and now you've given me a family." They stood there for a long moment, simply existing in the space of their shared happiness. They were two people who had been brought together by chance and circumstance, now a family, a home, a future. The wind, which had once felt so lonely, now carried with it the laughter of children and the promise of a life filled with love. The sun, as it set over the rugged Montana landscape, cast a final golden glow over the wild rose, a testament to a love story that was not about a man who married an ugly woman, but about a man who, in finding a beautiful soul, found his own redemption.